The triplets noticed his tattoo. What they said next changed his entire life. Marcus Webb had not slept more than 4 hours in 3 days, and even those 4 hours had been broken, restless, full of the kind of half-dreams that left a man more tired than when he closed his eyes. He sat in his truck in the parking lot of the diner at 5 in the morning, engine off, watching the light above the entrance flicker the way it had been flickering for 6 weeks. Nobody had fixed it. He had mentioned it twice. He had stopped mentioning it. He got out of the truck. He pulled his sleeves down to his wrists, even though the air was already warm. He went inside and started the coffee. This was Tuesday. Tuesday was no different from Monday or Wednesday or any other day of the week for Marcus. He had made peace with that, or something that looked enough like peace that he had stopped examining it too closely. He was 41 years old. He worked the early shift at a diner called Patty's on the edge of Clarksville, Tennessee. He refilled coffee. He wiped tables. He said good morning to people who sometimes said good morning back and sometimes did not, and either way was fine with him. He had been working at Patty's for 3 years. Before that, he had done 2 years of delivery driving. Before that, a year of warehouse work that had left his lower back with a permanent complaint. Before all of it, before the jobs that blurred into each other like rest stops on a long highway, he had been a soldier. He had served for 8 years, been deployed twice, and come home the second time a different man than the one who had left. He never talked about that part. The diner had 9 tables and a counter with 6 stools. The regulars came in waves. The construction crew from the highway project arrived first, loud and cheerful, ordering eggs and biscuits and asking the same jokes they had been asking since March. Then the older couples, quiet and comfortable, who sat across from each other and read the newspaper or just looked out the window without needing to fill the silence. Then the in-between crowd, the people who did not fit a pattern, who came in once or twice and sometimes became regulars and sometimes never appeared again. Marcus knew all the regulars by name and by order. He knew that Dale Humphrey took his coffee with 3 sugars and would deny it if anyone mentioned it. He knew that the woman who came in every Thursday with a library book always ordered oatmeal and never finished it. He knew that the 2 men in the corner booth on Friday mornings were brothers who had not spoken to their father in 15 years and who laughed so hard at their own jokes that they sometimes had to put their forks down. He observed all of this the way a man standing outside a warm house observes the people inside, with attention, with some tenderness. From a distance he maintained without thinking about it. His forearm was the thing people occasionally noticed, if they were looking at the right moment. The tattoo was on his left arm, just below the inside of the elbow, 3 small birds rendered in a faded blue-gray ink that had softened over the years the way all old tattoos do. Each bird was mid-flight, wings spread, moving in the same direction. They were simple, not artistic in any elaborate way, just 3 birds going somewhere, caught in the moment before they disappeared off the edge of the skin. He had gotten it 22 years ago, 1 week after he came home from his second deployment. He had walked into a tattoo shop on a Thursday afternoon without an appointment, pointed at a design in a binder, and sat in the chair without saying much. The artist had asked him once if he was sure about the placement, and he had said yes, and that had been the conversation. He did not explain the tattoo to people. When someone asked what it meant, he said it was personal, and most people accepted that because they could hear in the 2 words that it was the end of the subject. He wore long sleeves because of what was underneath the tattoo, a scar that ran from the edge of his wrist to just below the elbow, pale and raised and old. He was not ashamed of it. He was simply tired of explaining it. Long sleeves were easier. Long sleeves required nothing from anyone. On a Tuesday in late August, 40 minutes before the lunch rush, a woman came into Patty's with 3 children. They moved through the door the way a small, well-practiced team moves, the woman holding the door open, the children filing in with the automatic efficiency of people who had done this particular maneuver many times before. Marcus noticed them immediately, Not because they were unusual, but because 3 children of identical height and nearly identical appearance entering a space at the same time was something the eye could not ignore. They were girls. 7 years old, he would learn later. Triplets, which explained the identical height and the nearly identical faces. 3 versions of the same features arranged with small differences. One a little rounder in the jaw, one with slightly darker eyes, one with a gap between her front teeth that the other 2 did not have. They wore different colors, which Marcus suspected was deliberate on the mother's part, a practical system for identification. The mother was in her mid-30s. She had dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had started the morning with a better plan for it, and abandoned the plan somewhere around the first hour. She was wearing scrubs under a light jacket, the kind of scrubs that came from a hospital or a clinic, and she had the particular posture of someone who had been on her feet for a long shift and was now powering through on the other side of exhaustion, not rested, just past the point where tiredness showed. She guided the girls to the corner booth with the calm authority of someone who had long ago accepted that 3 children in a restaurant required a strategy, not a wish. They slid into the booth with the ease of practice, 2 on one side and 1 on the other, and within 30 seconds all 3 had their hands on the table and were looking around the diner with the specific bright-eyed energy of children who considered every new room a temporary adventure. Marcus walked over with menus. He set them on the table. He said the specials. He poured water into the glasses without spilling, which was something he had gotten very good at over 3 years of the same motion. He was about to ask if they wanted a few minutes when the girl sitting closest to the aisle looked up at him. She was looking at his arm. His sleeve had ridden up slightly when he leaned across to set the last glass down. Not much. Enough to expose the lower part of the tattoo, the 3 birds, the faded ink, the edge of what lay beneath. The girl's eyes went from the tattoo to his face and back to the tattoo. She was not staring the way some children stare, rude and unblinking, turning an adult's discomfort into a kind of sport. She was looking with something that resembled recognition, her head tilted slightly, her expression serious in the way that children's expressions are serious when they have decided that something in front of them is important. She pointed, not at the tattoo, at the birds. One finger extended, careful, as though she understood without being told that pointing at a stranger required some care. "Those are us," she said. Marcus stopped. He looked at her, he looked at the tattoo, he looked at her again. She counted the birds on his arm, her finger moving from left to right, not touching the skin, just tracing the shape in the air above it. "1," she said, "2, 3. She looked at her sisters, one and then the other and then back at Marcus. "That's us, we're 3, and we always fly together." The table was quiet. Even the other 2 girls had stopped fidgeting, drawn by whatever quality of stillness had entered the moment, the way children sometimes sense before adults do that something real is happening. Marcus had heard a great many things in 41 years. He had heard things that broke a person and things that held a person together, and things that fell somewhere in the complicated space between. He had heard orders shouted in dust and wind and noise. He had heard things said in hospital rooms that no one should have to say. He had heard silence that pressed against the inside of his chest like a weight. He had not heard anything that landed quite the way those 12 words landed. He pulled his sleeve back down. He did it without thinking, a reflex so old it had become part of the body's own grammar. And then he stood there for a moment longer than a waiter in a diner typically stands at a table, because he needed that moment, because something had moved in him, in the place he kept sealed and quiet, and he was not prepared for it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Cora," the girl said. "I'm Lily," said one of the other 2. "June," said the third. Their mother was watching him with a careful expression, not suspicious, careful, the kind of careful that a woman traveling alone with 3 children develops because the world requires it. "I'm Marcus," he said. "Can I get you all something to drink?" He took their order. He walked back to the counter. He poured 3 small orange juices and 1 coffee, black, the way the woman had asked for it, and he set them on a tray and carried them back to the table with steady hands. He had steady hands. He had trained himself to have steady hands years ago, back when they had not always been steady, back when the distance between who he had been and who he was trying to become felt like something he was crossing on a rope bridge in the wind. His hands were steady now. But on the drive home that afternoon, past the houses on Milford Road and the gas station and the field that had been empty for as long as he had lived in Clarksville, he pulled over without planning to. He sat in the truck with the engine running, both hands on the wheel, and he looked at his forearm. 3 birds. 22 years of carrying them. He had gotten them because 3 things had survived something that should have ended all of them. He had not had clearer words for it than that, not then and not since. He had walked into the tattoo shop with the weight of what he had come home from and the strange guilty relief of still breathing, and he had chosen 3 birds because 3 things were still going, and he needed to mark that somehow, to put it somewhere outside his body where he could look at it. He had not thought about them in years. They had become part of his skin, the way all old tattoos become part of the skin, familiar, nearly invisible, no longer new enough to demand attention. A 7-year-old girl with a gap between her teeth had looked at them for 10 seconds and said exactly what they were. He sat on the side of Milford Road for a while. Then he put the truck in drive and went home to feed Sargent, who was waiting at the door with the single-minded patience of a cat who had decided that the man he lived with was acceptable company, which was, Marcus had always felt, about the right amount of affection for everyone involved. He fed the cat. He ate a bowl of cereal standing at the kitchen counter. He went to bed. He lay in the dark for a long time before he slept. He thought about the word Cora had used. Together. He could not remember the last time he had used that word about himself and anyone else. Dana Reyes had not intended to go back to the diner. She had a rule about not becoming a regular anywhere, a soft rule, one of those rules that sounded more organized than it was, built less from principle and more from the low-grade anxiety of a woman who had learned that predictability could be used against you. If you were a regular somewhere, people noticed when you were not there. People asked questions. People, even kind people, could become one more thing requiring management. She had enough things requiring management. She had 3 7-year-olds who each required different approaches, different tones, different calibrations depending on the morning, the weather, the particular mystery of their internal weather systems, which never aligned in ways that made any single day straightforward. She had a 2-bedroom apartment she called the Controlled Disaster, a title she had given it with full irony and full love, because it was small and loud and covered in artwork that had been taped, tacked, and in 3 memorable cases directly drawn onto surfaces that were not paper, and she would not have changed it. She had a job that gave her 4 shifts a week at the hospital and occasionally took 6 from her. She had a co-parenting schedule that required a color-coded calendar and a particular kind of deep breathing she had learned from a podcast. What she did not have was simplicity. She had not had simplicity in years, and she had made her peace with that in the way that people make peace with things they cannot change, which is to say imperfectly and on a day-by-day basis. The first time she had taken the girls to Patty's Diner had been an accident of geography. Their usual Tuesday stop had been closed for a burst pipe, and she had turned onto the road looking for something, and found the diner and the sign that said breakfast all day, and she had pulled in because 3 hungry 7-year-olds in a moving vehicle were a problem that needed an immediate solution. She had not noticed Marcus particularly, beyond registering that he was patient with the girls and did not make the face that some people made when 3 children arrived at a table simultaneously, the face that communicated a desire for them to be quieter or smaller or somewhere else. He had refilled the orange juice without being asked. He had brought extra napkins with a kind of quiet efficiency that she had appreciated in the way she appreciated anything that simply worked. And then Cora had said that thing about the birds. Dana had watched his face in that moment. She was a nurse. She was trained to watch faces the way other people were not trained to watch faces, to read the small signals, the micro-expressions, the things people revealed before they knew they were revealing them. She had watched his face when Cora pointed at his arm and said those 12 words, and what she had seen had not been embarrassment or impatience or the gentle condescension that adults sometimes directed at children who said too much. What she had seen was someone being reached. She had not been able to stop thinking about that on the drive home. Not about him, particularly. About the moment. About what it meant that a grown man in a diner in Tennessee had been genuinely and visibly moved by something a 7-year-old said in under 30 seconds. She had turned it over in her mind the way she turned over puzzles that interested her, the way she went back to things that seemed to have more in them than was immediately visible. She had not planned to go back. Lily asked first, 3 days later. They had been talking about where to go for dinner on Saturday, all of them around the kitchen table with a map of the neighborhood spread out the way they sometimes did it, treating the choice like an expedition. And Lily had said, "What about the breakfast place, the one with the man who gave us extra juice?" Dana had said, "We should try something new." June had said, "But I liked it there." And Cora, who had said nothing during this exchange, had simply looked at Dana with an expression that contained no argument and no demand and complete, patient certainty. And Dana had felt the particular exhaustion of trying to out-reason a 7-year-old who was not even using words. They went back on Saturday. Marcus was there, of course he was. He was at the counter when they walked in, and he looked up when the door opened, and something in his expression settled, not in a dramatic way, the way things settle in movies, but in the small, quiet way that a person's face settles when something expected and good arrives. He brought the girls hot chocolate without being asked. It was September by then, and the mornings had turned, and hot chocolate was exactly right, and the girls wrapped both hands around the mugs with identical expressions of satisfaction that made Dana want to photograph the moment and also just sit inside it for a while. He pulled a coin from Cora's ear. He did it with no announcement, no build-up, just reached across the table while he was clearing a glass and produced a quarter from the space behind Cora's left ear with a slight turn of his wrist. And Cora shrieked with a laughter so pure and so sudden, and so loud that the couple at the table by the window turned around, and then smiled, because that kind of laughter is the kind no one can resist smiling at. Lily demanded one too. June demanded one. He produced 2 more quarters with the same calm competence, and all 3 girls were laughing now, that unstoppable rolling laughter that triplets sometimes achieve together, amplifying each other until the sound fills a room. Dana found herself smiling at her coffee cup. He crouched down beside the booth after that, not in a hovering way. In the way of someone who had decided that talking to 3 7-year-olds while standing over them was the wrong angle and had done something practical about it. He looked at the drawings the girls had pulled from their backpacks, the messy, vivid, urgent artwork of children who had not yet learned to doubt what their hands produced. He held each one and looked at it the way a person looks at something real. He asked Lily what the purple shape in the corner was supposed to be. She said it was a mountain, but also a dragon, which she said was a very normal thing for a mountain to also be. He said that made complete sense. She beamed at him. Dana watched all of this from across the table. She had been watching people her whole working life. She had learned to separate the people who were performing kindness from the people who were simply kind, because the performance had a quality of effort in it, a faint strain, an awareness of being observed. What Marcus did with her daughters had no strain in it. He was not managing them. He was not being patient in the way that costs something. He was just there, present, attending to them with the full and unhurried weight of someone who found them genuinely interesting. It was the most natural thing she had seen in a long time. She did not ask about the tattoo that visit. She thought about it. She saw it again when his sleeve shifted as he reached across the table, the three faded birds, and she remembered Cora's words, and she thought about asking. But it felt too soon, too pointed, and she did not want to watch his face close the way she suspected it would close if she pressed too quickly into something he kept private. She left a generous tip and loaded the girls into the car and drove home and spent the evening on the floor of the living room, helping June finish a puzzle, while Lily read out loud to herself in the bedroom and Cora sat at the kitchen table drawing something she refused to show anyone until it was done. They went back the following Saturday, and the one after that. By the fifth visit, Marcus had learned their orders before they sat down. By the sixth, Cora had begun greeting him the way you greet someone you have decided is yours, with absolute confidence and a complete absence of formality. Dana had begun to notice that the hour they spent in the diner on Saturday mornings was the quietest hour of her week. Not quiet because the girls were quiet. They were never quiet, but quiet in the sense that she was not bracing for anything, not running a calculation in the back of her mind about what came next, not managing the gap between what the day required and what she had left to give. She was just sitting with her coffee, watching her daughters be delighted and breathing. She had not realized how much she had needed a quiet hour until she was inside one. On the seventh visit, she asked about the tattoo. She waited until the girls were occupied with a coloring sheet the diner kept behind the counter for children, which Marcus had apparently sourced specifically because he had noticed the girls always had drawing supplies in their bags. She waited until he came back around to check on the table, and then she said it simply, the way she tried to say things she was not sure about, without build-up, without softening that turned into circling. She said, "The birds on your arm, is there a story there?" He looked at her. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she had miscalculated, that she had pushed into the thing too early after all, that she was going to watch his face close, and she was going to have to let it go. But he did not close. He looked at the table first, then at his forearm. He pulled the sleeve up, just a little, enough to show the tattoo, and he looked at it the way a person looks at an object they have carried so long they have stopped seeing it. He told her. He said it in the plain, careful sentences of someone who has learned that the only way to say certain things is to say them straight, with no decoration, because decoration makes them worse. He told her about his second deployment. He told her about the men in his unit who had not come home. He told her about the week after, about the tattoo shop, about why 3 birds. He said they were still going somewhere. I needed to know that. Dana did not move while he spoke. She was very still in the way she was still in rooms where stillness was the most honest response, where anything else would have been a performance. When he finished, she reached across the counter and placed her hand over his forearm, over the 3 birds, and held it there. She did not say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. Some things are not answered by words. Some things are answered by staying, by the simple and complete fact of not looking away. Marcus looked at her hand on his arm. He did not pull away. Outside the window, the September light was doing what September light does in Tennessee, going gold and long and slow across everything it touched. And inside the diner 3 girls were coloring with complete absorption, and for a moment the whole small world of the room was still. Marcus had a system for not wanting things. He had built it carefully over many years, the way a careful person builds something they intend to last. The system had rules, most of them unspoken, most of them so deeply ingrained by now that they operated below the level of decision, automatic as breathing. Do not let people in past a certain point. Keep the spaces around yourself clear. Do not want things that require other people to remain in your life, because other people leave, or are taken, or change in ways you cannot predict and cannot manage, and the wanting makes the loss a different kind of weight than you can carry. It was a good system. It had kept him functional for 22 years. It had kept him upright through the jobs and the empty evenings and the years that were survivable, if not much more than survivable, and he had told himself that survivable was enough, that asking for more than survivable was the kind of reaching that got people hurt. Dana Reyes was making his system very difficult to maintain. It was not a dramatic thing. That was what surprised him about it. He had braced, somewhere in the back of himself, for something dramatic. He had expected the wanting to arrive the way dangerous things arrived in stories, loudly, unmistakably, in a form you could argue with. Instead, it arrived the way most real things arrived, quietly, accumulating in the spaces between moments, in the fact of the Saturday mornings and the texts she sent him on Tuesday nights. She had started texting him in October. She had asked for his number the way she asked for most things, directly, without the social scaffolding most people built around asking. She had said, "I am going to text you a drawing." He had given her the number before he had time to think through the implications. That evening she sent him a photograph of a drawing Cora had done, a stick figure with a beard and an enormous forearm. The forearm had 3 small birds on it, drawn with a seriousness of intent that made them both recognizable and deeply abstract. Below the figure, in the unsteady letters of a 7-year-old who was still making friends with the alphabet, were the words, "Our Marcus." He sat with his phone in his hand in the kitchen for a long time. Then he sent back, "Tell her she got the birds exactly right." Dana had sent back a photograph of Cora's face when she received the message. Cora was grinning the enormous gap-toothed grin, both hands raised, a pencil still in one of them. Marcus had looked at that photograph longer than he intended. After that, the texts were a regular thing, not overwhelming, not demanding. Just present the way a consistent warmth is present, something you notice because it is there and notice differently when it is not. She texted him on hard nights at the hospital, short dispatches from the long hours, the kind of messages that were not asking for anything but that described a reality and trusted him to receive it. He texted back. He was not a natural texter. He had spent years in a narrow enough world that the conversational reflex had gone quiet. But she did not require a particular kind of response. She just required that he be there, and being there was something he found, to his surprise, that he wanted to do. He went to his first veteran support group meeting in November. He told no one he was going. He had known about the group for 2 years. He had been given the card by a doctor at a clinic appointment, one of those appointments he attended irregularly, when the body insisted on being attended to, and the doctor had been the kind of doctor who noticed things beyond what he was technically there to see. The doctor had said, "There is a group on Thursday evenings," and had handed him the card, and Marcus had taken it without comment and put it in the glove compartment of his truck and not thought about it again. Or he had thought about it. He had thought about it the way you think about a door you are not ready to open, aware of it, oriented toward it, not yet willing to put your hand on the handle. He drove to the community center on a Thursday evening in November with his hands tight on the wheel and his jaw set, and the familiar cold feeling in his chest that he associated with situations where he had no exit strategy. He sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. He counted. Counting was a thing he did when the cold feeling arrived, a practical way of making time concrete, of breaking an overwhelming present into smaller and more manageable units. He went inside. The room was smaller than he had imagined. 12 chairs in a circle, 8 of them occupied by men and women of various ages, various origins, various expressions of the specific kind of careful that people carry when they have come to a room like this for the first time. He sat in the back, which was not exactly the back because the chairs were in a circle and had no back, so he chose the chair that felt most like the back, the one where he could see the door most clearly. He said nothing that first night. He listened. He observed the room in the way he observed most rooms, with the full and habitual attention of someone who had learned that the details of a room could matter, and what he observed was this: the people in the circle were not performing their pain. They were not dramatizing it or minimizing it. They were simply describing it, in the plain and sometimes broken language of people who had carried something alone for too long, and had decided, on this particular evening, to put a portion of it down. He went back the following Thursday. He said one sentence. He said, "I have been carrying something for a long time, and I am not sure I remember how to put it down." He said it to the circle, and then he looked at his hands and did not say anything else. The group leader was a woman named Carol Haynes, who had a quality of absolute steadiness that Marcus recognized, the same quality he had seen in the best people he had ever worked alongside, the quality of someone who had decided that the only thing worth doing in any given room was to be fully present for whatever the room contained. Carol said, "That is enough for one night." He went back the Thursday after that. He said 2 sentences. He talked about the weight of certain kinds of silence, about the way silence becomes a habit, about how a habit long enough becomes indistinguishable from a personality. After the 3rd session, Carol stopped him as he was pulling on his jacket. She said, "You are the quietest person who keeps coming back that I have ever seen in this room." He said, "Is that a problem?" She said, "It is the opposite of a problem. In my experience, the ones who keep coming back when they are not yet ready to talk are the ones who need it the most. They know something about themselves that they have not put into words yet, but they keep showing up, and showing up is the thing." He thought about that on the drive home. He called Dana that night, not texted. Called, which was unusual enough that she picked up on the second ring, and said hello with a slight lift in her voice, the lift of mild surprise. He told her about the group. He did not frame it. He did not build toward it. He simply said, "I have been going to a veterans group on Thursday evenings. I went for the first time last month. I have gone 3 times. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus." He said, "Do not make it a big thing." She said, "It is a big thing, and I am going to make the thing it deserves to be made. And you can disagree with me about that, but you will be wrong, and I say that with complete respect." He was quiet. Then from somewhere he did not entirely understand, he laughed. It was a small laugh. It did not last long, but it was real. It surprised him the way small, real things sometimes surprised him, by existing in a place he had assumed was closed. Dana said, "There it is." He said, "There what is?" She said, "You have a very good laugh, and I was beginning to think I had imagined it." He sat in his truck in the dark for a while after he hung up, not because anything was wrong, but because something was right, and he was not yet practiced enough at that to know what to do with it. He was learning. He was, slowly and imperfectly, and with the caution of a man who had broken himself before by moving too fast in unfamiliar terrain, learning that being known by someone was not the same as being consumed by them, that the warmth he had felt around the outside of was something he was allowed to step into, that wanting things was not automatically a guarantee of loss. It was slow. It was the slowest learning he had ever done, but he kept showing up. And showing up, Carol had told him, was the thing. The pipe that burst in the ceiling of the apartment above Dana's burst on a Friday night in March at 11:45, which was the kind of timing that suggested the universe had a particular talent for inconvenience. Dana had been asleep for exactly 22 minutes after a 12-hour shift that had followed a morning of school drop-off and a grocery run, and 104 other small acts of maintenance that kept 3 children and 1 household operational. She woke to the sound of water. The sound was not subtle. It was not a drip or a seep or the preliminary whisper of a problem forming. It was the sound of water arriving in quantity and with intention, coming through the light fixture in the hallway, and then through a section of ceiling in the living room. And by the time she was fully awake and standing in the hall, she could see it pooling on the floor, dark and spreading, finding the low points the way water always finds the low points. She stood in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds, which was the time it took her brain to complete the calculation of what was happening and what needed to happen next. Then she moved. The girls were in their room, she checked. They were asleep, tangled in each other the way triplets sleep when they have decided that separate beds are a suggestion rather than a requirement. The water had not reached their room yet. She closed their door and went to call the building's emergency line, which rang for a long time before a recorded message told her that after-hours emergencies should be reported to a number she was then given, but the recording delivered too quickly for her to catch the first time. She called Marcus before she fully decided to. It was not a considered decision. It was the decision her hands made while her brain was still organizing the situation, the automatic reaching for the person you trust, the reflex that bypasses deliberation, because deliberation takes time and the water was still coming. His phone rang twice. He answered. She said, "Marcus, there is water coming through my ceiling and I cannot stop it and I need help." He said, "I am coming." He did not say anything else. He did not ask a series of clarifying questions or express sympathy in the way that would have used up seconds she did not have. He said he was coming and then she heard him moving, and then the line was still connected, but he was no longer talking because he was already doing the thing, which was exactly right. He arrived in 40 minutes. He had his truck. He had 2 contractor bags and a box of heavy tape he used for winter weather drafts in his own apartment. He also had, sitting in the passenger seat with the collected dignity of a cat who had not been given adequate warning before the excursion, a carrier containing Sergeant. Dana stared at the carrier. Marcus said, "I did not want to leave him. He does not do well when I leave unexpectedly." She looked at him. He said, "I know." She said, "I did not say anything." He said, "You did not have to." He was, despite this exchange, already moving, already assessing the situation with the particular efficiency of someone who had spent years in circumstances that required fast and practical thinking. He identified where the water was coming from and where it was going. He moved the furniture that was in the path of the spreading water. He laid the contractor bags down as a barrier along the baseboards. He found her mop and began working the floor. And he did all of this with the quiet, focused speed of someone who had decided that the problem in front of him was the only thing that existed. Dana moved alongside him. They worked without talking much, the coordination of 2 people who had learned each other well enough to share a space without needing to narrate it. She called the building manager again, and this time reached a person. She directed the maintenance team to the unit above when they arrived. She filled 2 bags with the girls' things, clothes and the particular stuffed animals that were non-negotiable, and lined them up by the door. At 1:30 in the morning, she stood in the kitchen and looked at the damage. The living room would need to be cleared. The flooring in the hall would have to come up. The ceiling would need repair. The apartment would not be livable for at least several days, probably more. She felt, for a moment, the specific exhaustion of being the only adult in charge of a situation, the weight of it, the way it pressed on a person who had been pressing back against it for years. And then Marcus came around the corner from the hallway and said, "The girls are still asleep, which is remarkable, and I found the box of drawings behind June's bed before the water got to it." He was holding the box. It was a plastic storage container she used to keep the girls' artwork, a year and a half of paintings and drawings and collages, the accumulated creative output of 3 children who drew the way some people breathe, constantly and with full commitment. She looked at the box, she looked at him. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Where do you want to put them?" She told him. He put the box in the bag by the door. And then he went back down the hall and came back with the large flat drawings, the ones on bigger paper, the ones that would not fit in the box, and he laid them out on the kitchen table and on the counter and on every flat surface available, spreading them carefully to keep them from curling. And among them was a drawing that Cora had made months ago, one she had not shown to anyone until it was done, and then had given to Dana with the solemn ceremony of a child delivering something important. It was a painting of 3 birds, rendered in the broad and confident brushstrokes of a child who had decided exactly what she wanted to make and had made it. Below the birds, in careful letters that had taken considerable effort, was a word. Together. The drawing was slightly damp at one corner, but it had not been ruined. Marcus stood at the kitchen table looking at it. Dana stood beside him. She said she made that in September, after the first time she saw your tattoo. He looked at it for a long time. He said she painted it the way she sees them. Dana said, "How do you mean?" He said, "Not going away, not disappearing off the edge, just flying, just still there." He said it quietly, and she heard in the words everything they contained, which was more than the words themselves, which was 22 years of carrying something and the long, slow work of setting it down, and the fact that a 7-year-old child had looked at 3 faded birds on a grown man's arm and seen not loss but continuation. The girls woke at 6 in the morning and processed the situation with the elastic resilience of children who take their cues from the adults around them. Cora immediately wanted to know if Sargent was going to stay with them. June wanted to know if they would miss school. Lily wanted to know if the ceiling coming down was like the ceiling in the movie they had watched about the haunted house, and Dana said no, firmly and several times. Marcus made pancakes on Dana's stove, which was still functional, while the girls sat at the kitchen table and explained to him with great seriousness and competing interruptions exactly what they believed should happen next, their 3 voices overlapping in the cheerful, unstoppable way that 3 voices do when they belong to people who have been completing each other's sentences since before they could speak. He listened to all 3 of them at once and somehow tracked each thread and responded to each one in turn. Dana stood in the doorway of her kitchen and watched. She had not allowed herself, in all the months since Patty's diner, to put a precise name on what was building between them. She was careful with names. She had learned that putting a name on something changed it, fixed it, and she had not been ready to fix it. She had just let it be what it was, warm and present and accumulating. But standing in the doorway of her kitchen on a ruined Friday night that was becoming a Saturday morning, watching Marcus Webb make pancakes for her daughters while Sargent observed from the carrier with an expression of regal neutrality, she felt something settle in her chest, simple and clear. She was not afraid of this. She had been afraid of things for a long time. She had been afraid of needing people and afraid of people needing her in ways she could not sustain and afraid of the specific loneliness of being with someone who was not really with you. She had been afraid of many things. She was a practical woman, and she had made practical peace with most of them. She was not afraid of this. She did not say it out loud. She did not need to. She filed it away in the place where she kept the things she was sure of, the things she did not need to argue with or qualify, the things that simply were. The girls ate their pancakes. Marcus ate his standing at the counter the way he always ate, the habit of a man who had spent years treating meals as fuel rather than events, though she had noticed lately that he was sitting more often, taking longer, the habit loosening. Outside, the early light was coming through the kitchen window, and the day was beginning to do what days do regardless of what has happened in the night, which is to say it was beginning. The small church hall on the edge of the Veterans Center had 40 chairs and a folding table with a coffee urn that had been making the same coffee since 2009 and had no plans to stop. The chairs were arranged in the familiar circle, and Marcus Webb stood inside that circle for the first time. He had been sitting in it for a year. Standing was different. Carol Haynes had told him 3 weeks before that he could take whatever time he needed, that there was no expectation, that the circle did not require anything from him except his presence. He had told her that he had been thinking about saying something. She had said, "When you are ready." He had said, "I think I might be getting there." She had looked at him with a steady look and said, "I know." He stood. He looked at the circle of people around him, the men and women who had come to this room week after week, who had said their pieces and sat with other people's pieces, and returned the following Thursday regardless, and he thought about what he wanted to say. He had prepared nothing. He had learned, over the year in this room, that prepared words had a quality of distance to them, a quality of having been managed. He had learned to trust the unprepared version, the words that arrived when he stood still long enough and let them come. He said, "I want to tell you about a tattoo." The room was quiet. He said, "I have had it for 22 years. 3 birds on my forearm going somewhere together. I got it the week I came home the second time. I got it because 3 men in my unit did not come home with me, and I needed to put them somewhere I could see them, and I chose birds because birds keep going. Because even when you lose sight of them, they are still out there, still moving." He stopped for a moment. He looked at his arm. He said, "I wore long sleeves for 22 years, not because of the tattoo, because of what was under it, a scar from a time when I was not doing well. I wore the sleeves because I was tired of explaining, tired of people looking at me like I was a problem they did not know how to solve. And somewhere in those 22 years, the long sleeves became a habit, and the habit became the way I moved through the world, covered, contained, not requiring anything from anyone." He paused again. Someone in the circle shifted, but no one spoke. He said, "Last August I was working a shift at a diner. A woman came in with her 3 daughters, triplets, 7 years old, and one of them, the smallest one, looked at my arm and she looked at the tattoo and she said, 'Those are us, 3 birds. We always fly together.'" He breathed. He said, "I have thought about those 12 words every day since she said them, not because they were complicated, because they were so simple. She looked at something I had been carrying for 22 years and she saw not the loss in it but the continuation. She saw birds still flying. She did not see the grief. She saw the going." He looked at the circle. He said, "I have been in this room for a year and I have been very quiet, and I know that. I have been quiet because I did not know how to say what was true without it sounding too large or too small. But what is true is this. I came into this room broken in ways I had convinced myself were just my personality. I had a system for not wanting things. I had a system for staying covered and contained and not letting anyone close enough to matter. And what happened over this year, in this room and outside it, is that the system stopped working." He said, "A woman who is braver than I am kept showing up anyway. Her daughters kept drawing pictures of me and giving them names. A woman named Carol kept putting out chairs in a circle and trusting that showing up was enough. And I kept showing up, and it turns out that was enough, not to fix anything, because I do not think the word fix is right, but to begin something." He said, "I am going back to school in the fall, social work. I want to work with veterans. I want to sit in rooms with people who are covered and contained and doing their best to survive. And I want to tell them that survivable is not the ceiling. That wanting things is not automatically a guarantee of loss. That a child you have never met can look at the thing you carry and see the birds still flying." He stopped. He had been standing for 11 minutes. He counted later. He sat down. Carol looked at him from across the circle. She did not say a great deal. She did not need to. She said, "That is enough for one night." He said, "Yes." And it was. Outside the hall, after the meeting, he sat on the steps in the cold air and called Dana. He called her because she was the person he called. It was as simple as that and as significant as that. She picked up on the second ring. She said, "How was it?" He said, "I talked tonight. I talked for 11 minutes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 11 whole minutes, Marcus. He said, I know. She said, are you all right? He said, yes. He said it and it was true, which was not a thing he had been able to say on a reliable basis for a long time. She said, Cora is going to want a full report. He said, tell her I mentioned the birds. She said, she is going to be impossible about this. He said, yes. 3 weeks later, he asked Dana to dinner. He did it in the diner at the end of his shift by folding a note and handing it to her across the counter with the straight-faced seriousness of a person delivering a document of some importance. The note said, I would like to take you to dinner. Not here. A different place. You can say no and I will accept that and nothing between us will change. I am putting it in a note because I need to be able to walk away and pretend it did not happen if you say no. Dana unfolded the note and read it. She looked up at him. He was already arranging the coffee mugs with great concentration. She said, Marcus. He did not look up. She said, yes. He looked up. She was smiling, not a small smile. The real one, the one he had seen the first time on a Saturday morning in September when Cora had identified the birds, the smile that started in her eyes before it reached anything else. He said, all right then. She said, all right then. The girls were in the corner booth. Cora looked up from her drawing and looked at Marcus, and looked at her mother, and looked back at Marcus. She said, our Marcus is happy today. He said, yes. She said, good. And she went back to her drawing, satisfied, as though this was simply a thing she had been waiting to confirm, a thing she had known for some time would arrive, patient as a person who has never doubted that the birds are still flying. He enrolled in the social work program in September. He drove to campus on his first day with the same tight hands on the wheel and the same counting, but a different cold feeling in his chest, not dread exactly, something else, something with more air in it. He walked into the building and found his classroom and sat down. A young man sat next to him, early 20s. A veteran, Marcus could tell, in the way that veterans can always tell, some quality in how they chose the seat with sight lines, how they oriented themselves to the room. The young man did not speak. He sat with his jaw set and his hands very still. Marcus knew that posture. He said, first day. The young man said, yeah. Marcus said, me too. The young man looked at him, a short assessing look, and then looked back at the front of the room. Marcus did not say anything else. He did not need to. He had learned in Carol's circle that presence was often enough, that sitting beside someone in the specific way of someone who was not going anywhere could do work that words could not. He sat, the class began. He thought about Cora's drawing, still tacked to the wall above his kitchen table, 3 birds in broad and certain brushstrokes, the word together below them in the careful letters of a child who had decided something was worth the effort. He thought about 22 years of long sleeves and the August morning when a 7-year-old pointed at his arm and saw not the weight of what he carried, but the shape of what was still going. He thought about Dana's hand on his forearm, still and warm, saying nothing, saying everything. He opened his notebook. He wrote the date. He was ready.